Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to give a huge thanks to Yoon and team for really focusing this entire summit on public lands advocacy. It took a lot of leadership, a lot of courage to really infuse this, not just make it an add-on, but it's been so cool to have so many conversations and so much programming around our public lands and waters right now. So thank you to everyone on the OMS team for bringing that forward. As Vince mentioned, I'm the executive director of the Conservation Alliance, and I know we had a chance to talk with a lot of you around breakfast today about what TCA is, but for those of you who aren't fully familiar with it, in short, we harness the power of business for conservation in North America. We were started over 30 years ago by the leaders of North Face, Patagonia, REI, and Kelty, who all came together and said, hey, y'all, the most important asset of our economy, the outdoor economy, is healthy lands and waters, and we are not doing enough to collectively protect those. And if we don't protect them, not only are we going to lose biodiversity, but we're going to lose the future of this industry. So fast forward to today, we're now an alliance of over 200 businesses who's become a really well-known force for impact in land and water conservation in North America. All the way from grassroots organizations on the ground to the halls of DC, we're well recognized. And so thank you to everyone here who's a TCA member. Maybe before I get going anymore, raise your hand if you're a TCA member here. Awesome, super cool. All right, so when I got two directives on what to talk about this morning, or this afternoon. First one came from Yoon. He was like, hey, can you give everyone a little state of the union? What's going on in public lands and waters right now? There's a lot going on in DC. Can you ground us out a little bit in truth? So we're gonna do that. Second directive came from my boisterous 4-year-old daughter, Abigail. Last week, I was sitting in my office just poring over the policy updates that I was gonna talk about this morning and probably looking a little down. And she burst into my office, as she always does, to show me some recent drawing or something like that. And she looks at me and says, Dad, what are you doing? I said, well, next week I get to go hang out with a bunch of my friends, and we're gonna talk about ways that we can get people to care about and protect trees and polar bears a little bit more. I didn't want to talk about continuing resolutions or executive orders with a 4-year-old, so I like trees, polar bears, that makes sense. And she looks at me very inquisitively, and you can see the wheels turning in the 4-year-old brain. And she says, but Dad, everyone loves trees. Just tell them to go hug one. And the only way that a 4-year-old can distill a very complex topic into one simple thing, I think Abigail points out exactly what we need to do here today. We're going to talk about some policies, and we've got some short-term tactics and short-term work we need to do to defend our public lands and waters. But ultimately, the role of all of us in the room today, being media, being the voices for nature, being the voices for the outdoor economy, have a huge responsibility to get more people to care about nature and to move them to a point of action. So, if you disagree with that thesis, you can call up my daughter, though I highly recommend not going toe-to-toe with her, because she is spicy. Okay, so where are we right now? Public lands and waters. Since you all met last year in Missoula, we've actually had a couple big wins. You can see on the screen here, in the final days of the Biden administration, we saw the designation of Chuckwalla National Monument, which is down by Joshua Tree, and Satitla Highlands National Monument, which is further up in California, closer to Mount Shasta. Two amazing landscapes that hold amazing ecological, recreational, and tribal interests. This is a huge effort by a lot of the people in the room here today. Big wins in the past year. Yesterday we heard a lot about the public land sell-off, and I know a lot of you have been involved in there, so I'm not going to go too deep in there, but this summer we saw significant threats to our public land systems, and I want you all to pat yourselves on the back because this community showed up big this summer, and we pushed hard against those proposals through the budget reconciliation process, and we defeated it. A huge win that we are wanting to really take and move forward as we think about the next steps in conservation in North America. So that's where we've been, and what I'm going to do now is figured I'd frame this part of the conversation a little bit like a rom-com. We're moving into Hallmark holiday season, so I figured that's kind of a good narrative to pull things together. That's the good, fun part of the beginning of the movie. We had some big victories, but now we're going to face a little bit of a pinch. Because the reality right now, and I tend not to be a hyperbolic person, the reality is that we're facing really significant threats to our public lands and water systems, both the landscapes themselves as well as the agencies that manage them. Unfortunately, I could probably spend the whole entire week, but I'm not going to keep you all here for that long to talk about what's going on. So I want to talk about 6 kind of key priorities that Conservation Alliance, a lot of our partners, are working on right now, just to give you a little bit of the lay of the land. This morning, if you were at the breakfast and walked around the different tables, you heard a little bit about the roadless rule. So under the Clinton administration 20 plus years ago, they put this roadless rule protection on 60 million acres of our national forests and said, hey, these are amazing landscapes, these are amazing recreational opportunities, no roads allowed. It wasn't about the roads, but in order to log, in order to mine, in order to build oil and gas infrastructure, you need roads. So it was kind of a sneaky way to get it to say, we're not going to develop these lands. We are currently in the middle of seeing those being rolled, the roadless rule being rolled back. Where kind of the U.S. Department of Agriculture has kind of come out and said, we're going to pull this back in putting 45 million acres at risk. On those lands pertinent to this community here, there's over 25,000 miles of trails. There's 8,000 climbing routes. There's hundreds of miles of whitewater, amazing recreational opportunities, which could be lost. And so we're digging deep on that side of what things. More kind of a more specific landscape we're focused in on the boundary waters. I know there's a Minnesota contingency here in the room. So this is in your backyard. Up in northern Minnesota, there's Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, which is the most highly visited wilderness area in the U.S. Amazing pristine lakes, canoeing, other activities. And we're seeing indications that they're going to permit a copper sulfide mine right at the border of that wilderness area, which would leach toxins into this amazing wilderness area. So we're super keen on this one. We're pushing hard against it. We know, and we're working with through a number of avenues to try and make sure that that copper mine doesn't get permitted and doesn't get actually executed. In the Biden administration, we saw what they call the BLM public lands rule. So this is actually a really cool effort that a lot of people in the outdoor industry really spoke out and pushed hard against. Not to get into weeds of public lands management too much, but essentially all of our agencies have what they call multiple use mandates. Say you have to manage these lands, balancing all different interests. In forever, recreation and conservation, we're kind of like, but that's kind of like a use, and we'll kind of bring it into it. But what they did under the BLM, under Secretary Holland of the DOI, was said, hey, conservation, recreation, these are legitimate uses of our BLM lands, and now you have to manage those properly in respect of everything else, including grazing, including extractive industries. It was a huge win, especially when you think about how many acres fall under the BLM land system. We're similarly seeing this rolled back. We're in the middle of that process right now. So we're pushing hard. We're fighting against that as well. Both under the Biden and Obama administration, TCA, a lot of our partners worked on establishing a lot of national monuments across the U.S. So names that might sound familiar are Bears Ears, Grand Staircase, Bajnwabjo Itakukvene near the Grand Canyon, Chuckwalla, Satitla, Avikome, amazing landscapes all over the West that hold significant ecological, cultural, recreational, and most importantly, tribal interests. We've seen enough indications from the administration, from Congress, and from Department of Justice that these landscapes are at risk in the near future, and so we're prepping a lot of the work behind the scenes right now too. Alaska, I don't even know where to start with Alaska. Alaska's hurting right now. It's right at the kind of the bullseye of President Trump's energy dominance executive order, where they're looking at opening up a lot of the amazing landscapes up there, including the National Wildlife Refuge up in the north. They permitted Ambler Road. They're looking at opening up the Tongass National Forests, the D1 lands. It's just like at the epicenter of all the bad shit coming out of DC right now. And so we're very concerned about that and mobilizing tribes, mobilizing businesses, mobilizing communities to do what we can to protect Alaska and the wildlife that resides on those lands. And then I know a lot of you are very keen in tune with this one, but we've seen significant cuts in impacts, not just to landscapes, but to the agencies that manage these landscapes. So the Park Service, Department of Interior, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, all these agencies are seeing significant cuts in headcount as well as financials to properly manage these amazing landscapes. So it's something that both has short-term and long-term effects, which we're super keen on getting on. The majority of the threats right now are really coming through the administration. So these are unilateral decisions that are falling under executive orders that kind of roll up into a need for more energy, a need for more fossil fuels, and then they kind of manifest through secretarial orders, Department of Interior, and the Department of Agriculture. We are also seeing some threats in Congress as well. Now, because there's such a slim majority, both in the House and the Senate, what we're seeing is a lot of the efforts to kind of erode our public lands are coming through unconventional methods. So budget reconciliation, which we saw this summer, had that public land sell-off provisions. You would never normally see that as a means to balance our national budget or national debt, but it came up, we pushed back. But you're also seeing some other funky things and just weird things coming through in terms of looking at wilderness areas around our borders to potentially let the Department of Defense use those for national security issues and a lot of other things that we're really concerned about. We feel like we have a little bit more ability to play the chess game of Congress right now, just given some champions who really came out across the aisle this summer. So working with those friendlies to really push back against anything we're seeing coming for legislation. So that was the pinch. That's where Matthew McConaughey, gets in some sort of trouble in his rom-com narrative. But not all is doom and gloom. We're actually seeing a couple proactive efforts to protect both recreational and conservation resources. So Colorado, Montana, Oregon has some really cool bills that we're watching. Obviously, Congress isn't even in session or working right now, so we'll see when that stuff gets pushed through, but we're tracking those, we're pushing those forward, and as well as what they call the Public Lands and Public Hands Act, which is kind of a reaction to what we saw in the public land sell-off issue this summer, which is putting tighter parameters on any other future ability to sell off our public lands. So all four of these things, as well as a couple more that we're seeing coming down the line, are actually bipartisan, and so we have a little bit of hope coming through these overall. So that's where we are right now. I realize that was not very uplifting, but the reality is our public lands and agencies that manage them are facing some significant threats, and I don't think we should put rose glasses on. But with challenge comes opportunity. And this is where I think we need to listen to Abigail a little bit more. That yes, we've got some things we got to focus on right now, but what we have facing in front of us, and I think the biggest challenge, and especially knowing there is media, there are voices in this room, is that we have to do a better job reframing the narrative around our public lands and waters so that we don't face what we just saw on the screen in 2 years, in 4 years, in 6 years, in 8 years. My biggest concern is not that we can't weather this current storm. We're going to lose some stuff, but we can get back. We can build back, right? My biggest concern is that if we look forward 10 years from now and we look back, if we haven't done our jobs as communicators, as media, in terms of really bringing forth the true value of our public lands, deeper with our current advocates and broader with unlikely allies, we're going to face this tidal wave every electoral cycle going forward. So that's the challenge we have in front of us today. On the screen here, these are some of the numbers of the historical impact of the Conservation Alliance. Really proud numbers, right? We've protected with a lot of you in the room here today, we've protected over 100 million acres of land, 5,000 river miles, we've bought climbing areas, we took down dams, really cool and impactful stuff. But the hard truth is that we've left a lot on the table. There's a significant delta from what you see on the screen and what we could have seen. And if you look at the current environment that we face right now, we risk a lot that we're going to lose between where we are now and where we could be in a couple years if we don't do our jobs a little bit better. And I'm pointing the finger at myself first. If we were doing our jobs right, if all Americans kind of understood the true altruistic and economic and cultural value of our public lands, we would not be facing what we have here today. So every year, the Colorado College, which is based in Colorado Springs, so just east of here, a little over the Rockies, produces a really cool poll where they go around and they interview people. They measure public sentiment around conservation issues, regardless of demographic, geography, ideology, right? And so these numbers here on the screen represent what they've pulled forward in terms of, hey, this is the true public sentiment around our public lands and waters. Those are some pretty great numbers. I don't think you would find any other issue out there today where you see 72% of the public saying, yes, we can align on this issue. And that's great. That's an amazing opportunity for a lot of us in the room here who care about public lands and waters. 72% might be the last issue that we have in the United States to galvanize support around, which is both daunting and encouraging. But here's the pitch. If those numbers were true, why did 6 months after they published that report, where 70+% of Americans want to protect our public lands, did we face 3 million acres being potentially sold off? Why do we face 45 million acres of our national forests being potentially eroded for extractive industries, putting our economy at risk? There is a huge delta right now between true public sentiment and reality from the political side of things. And that's the gap that we have to close. Because if you've got all these people on the one side who actually truly value public lands and waters, and you've got political action way over here, we cannot survive in this gap right here. And so that's a challenge for us going forward. I'm not going to be prescriptive. Y'all are way more better communicators than myself. But what I want to do is I'm going to give you 3 principles from a practitioner perspective that I think are pertinent to helping to close that gap and to reframe and really accelerate the true value of our public lands and waters with all Americans. So I've got 3 principles here today. Find common ground, stay authentic, and show consistency, bring consistency. To kind of pull these principles forward, I want to take you all a little bit west of here, near the Grand Canyon, to the Baj Nuabjo Itakuqvene National Monument. So this is an amazing national monument that was established under the Biden administration that the Conservation Alliance and so many of our partners had been working for a long time to protect. It's the ancestral homelands of 13 modern-day tribes, including the Hopi, the Paiute, the Havasupai, the Hualapai. It also hosts water resources that drain into the Colorado River. It is the home of endangered species. It's the home of amazing recreational opportunities. And you can see on the map here, the Baj, the commonly referred to as Baj, so I'll do that going forward. Baj was the missing link between 16 existing protected areas that made a 600-mile protected area corridor from Moab, Utah, all the way out to the Mojave Desert in California, the largest connected protected area in the lower 48 states. So this work took place over a number of years, and in 2023, those 13 tribes who I mentioned got together and really supercharged the campaign to protect Baj permanently. And we saw it designated as a national monument during that time. So that the Baj Nuabjo Itakuqvene National Monument, while it is amazing opportunity, 1 million acres that were protected, the campaign and current existence of that protected landscape are not without contention or conflict, right? It epitomizes tension around conservation in the West right now. Within miles of each other, you've got tribal interests, you've got recreational interests, you've got grazing interests, you've got hunting interests, and you've got uranium mining. In the narrative that has followed Baj in so many other landscapes right now, unfortunately, is painted in very, very black and white terms, right? You see the conversation, the landscape itself being pushed to the edges of political and in the rhetorical spectrum. You see tribes being pitted against ranchers. You see conservation pitted against development. But the reality is that if you dig in and you get to know the people on the ground and you get to know the campaign itself, there is way more common ground and way more nuance from everyone in that greater community than the narrative and the politics indicate. There's way more common ground that is found with the ranchers, with the tribes, with the recreationists. They all in some way, shape, or form want to protect that land. Their perspective, it looks a little bit different, but ultimately the values of that landscape are way deeper than the politics and the narrative indicate. So to the credit of the tribes who really pushed forward that campaign, they saw that common ground and they embraced it. So over years of conversations around kitchen tables and in town halls, they pulled together a proposed resource management plan that embraced that common ground and that nuance. On Baj's national monuments, you can graze in certain areas, you can hunt in certain areas, you can recreate in certain areas, but it also protects the most sacred tribal interests and the most important ecological interests. What they did was they stitched together this mosaic of interests and brought it together as a really comprehensive common ground package and proposed that to Secretary Haaland and ultimately saw it designated. Now, I think finding that common ground and listening to people and pulling that campaign to the center and not pushing it out to the edges was absolutely critical in seeing its success. And it's absolutely critical towards the efforts right now to currently defend it. And like Baj, so many of our public lands follow this similar narrative, right? We're seeing things pushed to the sides of the political and rhetorical spectrum. We see endangered species protected. We see them pulled off the endangered species list. We see Bears Ears get protected. We see significant boundary adjustments. We see national forests protected. We see them opened up to logging and mining. And when the actual politics outrun the true public sentiment, the ecosystems, the recreationists, the communities, the businesses who rely on their health cannot succeed in the long run. So if we're going to see durable wins for our lands and waters right now, we have to pull people in together. We have to find more common ground. We have to embrace nuance. We have to be really to pull unlikely allies in, to have compromise, to have conversations. And many of you have done this over the past bit, right? A lot of you, especially during the public land sell-off issue this summer, we saw a lot of folks really kind of embrace that, say, hey, this is what we truly care about, what we recognize there are a lot of interests on these public lands, and we want to bring people together. And it's really cool to see this nuanced common ground approach going forward. And I can't tell you the importance in the terms of the messaging going forward, how important this is to continue to double down on and to continue to bring people into this so that we can see the 72% sentiment actually grow and actually be a powerful force for protection out there. Yep. So find common ground, stay authentic. This might seem like a no-brainer for a lot of you amazing communicators out there to stay authentic, but in a highly emotional and politicized world, it's way harder than you think it is, right? As I've mentioned many times, the politics around Baj are pretty polarized to the point that where a lot of the tribes themselves, and especially the youth of the tribes who were at the forefront of the National Monument designation, have totally had to go back into the background because of fear of retaliation. Right, we've seen recent days, we've seen arguments that kind of span both sides of the equation. We've seen the tribes pushing on their tribal interests. We've seen recreationists coming out and say, you need to protect this for recreationist perspectives. You've seen climate advocates coming out there and advocating for the protection of these landscapes for climate purposes. And on the other side, you've seen arguments saying it's a gross overreach of federal authority, that it hinders energy fruition, it hinders housing development, and there's so many narratives around both sides of the equation that it's easy to get caught up in a lot of that. But what I think has been so powerful in this campaign in particular is that the tribes who have been at the forefront of the campaign, through all of that, they've always stayed authentic to their message, that these lands are their past, their present, and their future. They should surely support messages that Conservation Alliance is putting out there in terms of the economic vitality of these lands, but they always lead with their authentic message that this is their homelands. And that is heard on the ground, and it's heard in DC. And by always coming back to their own voice, their own authenticity, what it brings is credibility and standing. So that when they do go to a hall in the halls of DC, and even if they disagree with a politician's view that they're talking to, at least you can't poke at the fact that they aren't authentic, that they aren't true to their own voice. And what that authenticity brings to this campaign in particular is that it brings so much credibility to who is leading that overall. So as we think about public lands overall in all of our engagement, it's so critical to remain authentic to our own voices. Because if we remained authentic to our own voices, if you look around the room here, we all have different voices, we all have different stakeholders, we all have different messages. If we're individually authentic, collectively we are more diverse. And right now, our diversity is our strength, because we need to push back hard against what we're seeing come from DC. So 8 years ago, we found ourselves in a very similar situation. We saw monuments being rolled back. We saw public lands opened up to oil and gas extraction. And I was working at the at Patagonia at the time, and we pushed back hard, right? We pushed back really hard against the administration. We sued the president. And even though that might seem like a pretty radical movement, it was actually followed in the line of 40 years of the Chenard family driving forward a business that was framed around conservation. Suing the president was authentic to Patagonia. We also saw different types of actions. Our good friends at GOO got out there, and suing the president was not authentic to them. So what they did was they made what they call a campfire s'mores GOO energy gel, where they raised all the money and they gave it to Conservation Alliance so that we could do the hard work. Equally authentic. None of those tactics is better or worse, but together they created a really unified front towards pushing back against threats to our public lands and waters. So, find common ground, stay authentic, and bring consistency. The last thing I want to talk to you about today is bringing consistency to our messages. So even though the whole efforts to roll back to establish Baj National Monument looked like they took place kind of 2023 and on, in reality, that work had been going on for decades. The tribes, Grand Canyon Trust, Osprey, Cotulla, all of our partners were in that fight for a long time, and they never gave up. And there's a lot of lessons to be sure to be learned from the tenacity to keep going for decades. But what I think is more powerful is that how they showed up was that they showed up in the small moments and the big moments. They didn't just come in when there was headwinds or tailwinds to the campaign. They didn't just come in when it rose to the top of the news cycle or fell off, but they were there every day, reminding everyone around that landscape why they cared about it, what they had at stake in its protection, and ultimately they built a robust set of constituents and advocates who dug deep when it was time to advocate for the protection and are digging deep now as we're seeing threats to rolling it back. So these numbers here are some polls from Arizona in particular in terms of public sentiment around public lands and waters. You don't get to those types of numbers if you don't build a consistent, robust constituency. And that only comes through the small stories and the big stories. And I know it's really tempting to always kind of jump into a fight when it rises to the top of the news cycle, but we will only win public sentiment if we are there communicating every day, telling the positive stories, telling the value of these landscapes to every single person so that when push comes to shove, we can pull them in and they know why they're there and what they're doing there. Much like Baj, our large set of public lands and waters are facing significant threats right now, and we need to show up consistently for them. It doesn't mean you have to show up for every landscape, but find the one that means most to you, show up consistently, get those messages out there, and bring things forward. So with huge challenge in front of us, we also have a huge opportunity. If there's one community that I entrust and would bet on to showing up big when things get tough, it's the outdoor community. We've shown that time and time again. And so as we think about what's in front of us right now, I'm actually very optimistic. We're going to have some hard years in front of us for sure, but we have the ability to reframe the narrative about our public lands and waters so that they can become one of the most unifying topics in our nation. In his book, Desert Solitaire, Ed Abbey, the amazing activist and environmental writer, wrote this line. He said, "The idea of wilderness needs no defense. It only needs defenders." And I totally agree that we need more defenders than ever right now. But I hate to disagree with Ed Abbey on this one, but I actually think the idea of wilderness actually needs defense too. We're in a time when the first snow of winter on Rocky Mountain snow caps, when clear waters to fish and provision your family, of endless trails to bike and to hike and to hunt on, of sunsets over red rock deserts that house tribal interests from our nation's first stewards. those ideas do need defense. And if we're going to make any progress going forward, we need to get creative, we need to get courageous, we need to have clarity to show up, find common ground, bring authenticity, and show up consistently, and hug a few trees while we're at it. Because I think if we do, the defenders are going to come. So thank you all for having me here today. Really appreciate all the work you are doing. Stay safe.